So influenza isn't the only diseases that the CDC and the World Health Organization worry about. Center for Disease Control, that's centered in the United States, World Health. West Nile. So West Nile um, is had an outbreak of 1,118 cases, highest number ever reported in the United States in 2012. And so that is something that we worry about. Also, malaria is another thing transmitted by mosquitoes. It's caused by a parasite, so the mosquito is the vector. Right here in the United States, in Texas, we had a West Nile watch, and this, again, August 2012. They ended up needing to do aerial sprayings to try to control it. And what do all these diseases have in common? Most are zoonosis. Zoonosis, we're going to talk about what this means. We're going to talk about each of these things one at a time in the future slides. So their emergence and spread involve changes in human society or societal ecology, so what we are doing and where we are going. They affect humans due to changes in their interactions with local and global environments. They remain dangerous to humans because they evolve, and control requires scientifically informed public health measures. So when we talk about what is zoonosis, zoonosis is a disease that can be transmitted from animals to humans and often back again. So what types of diseases are we talking about? Bubonic plague, rabies, hantavirus, mad cow disease, bird flu, swine flu, West Nile fever, Lyme disease, SARS, Ebola, monkeypox, Nipah encephalitis, sorry if I butchered that, and Lassa fever. So those are all diseases that can be transmitted back and forth between humans and animals. This was a book, but it was based on stuff that is true and has become even more true. A zoonosis in an animal infection becomes transmittable to humans, and it's just saying here that it's a word of the future destined for heavy use in the 21st century, and that's 100% true. So looking at things that can happen because of zoonosis. Here's where we are looking at emerging and reemerging infections. So emerging means that that would be the first time we've ever seen them, and reemerging is that they come and go. 70% of them are vector-borne, meaning that they're carried by an insect, and then that doesn't get the virus but can transmit it, or there's zoonotic where it affects the animal and the and people. So the yellow one are arthropod-borne, meaning that they're carried by the arthropods. The red was rodents, and then purple is other, and that includes bats. So we're seeing lots of different cases. This Ebola one, I know about that one that occurred in a facility with monkeys. And so we haven't had a natural outbreak. It was in a facility. So this is what we're talking about with zoonosis, is that different animals can carry viruses that can spread to people and other animals. So I'll talk more about that in a second. So the emergence and spread involve changes in social society. So what we're talking about is that we're moving all over the planet very quickly, very easily. And with global climate change, we tend to have natural disasters more frequently. We're getting bigger rains, bigger floods, hurricanes, and all of that. So those changes are causing us to be in conditions that we haven't been in before, as far as socially moving around and spreading things. Human society include populations of where we live, the way we travel, and the way we produce food. So human social ecology is kind of the mixture between um, what we do and where we go. So those factors alter interactions among human populations around animals, both domestic and wild. So this is kind of a lengthy diagram. All I want you to see here is that wildlife, human, and domestic animals um, overlap. So let's just take the human and the wildlife. We can encroach on places. What we mean is that we're building and moving into places that where we haven't been before. We have contact with wild animals that we haven't had previously. West Nile is an example of that. It's carried by a deer tick, um, which is like a wood tick, but the what Lyme, did I say West Nile? I meant Lyme if I did. Lyme disease was not, those ticks weren't coming in contact with people previously. And since we've moved more into the area of Lyme, I believe it's Massachusetts, the ticks have gotten into people. And at first was diagnosed because children were getting rheumatoid arthritis, which Lyme disease is really a crazy thing. And then since then, those ticks have moved. And part of that too is because we don't have as harsh of winters. And so you can see um, all of these changes between being into wild places and being around wild animals more than we had in the past. We talked before, there's a lot more global travel, urbanization, and we have the biomedical field that is changing the ecology. I'm not sure what they mean about technology and industry. Agricultural intensification, that is just where we are growing more and more animals, or raising more and more animals in smaller and smaller um, facilities because of cost. And so we cram all these animals together, and that can cause outbreaks. And then we have encroachment. That was over here, human encroachment. So this is domestic animals getting into contact with wild animals, and birds are a big part of that. And when we talk about spillover and spill back, that just means viruses going between these two populations. So they affect humans due to changes in our interactions with global and local environments. Um, and this is just an article that came out in 2012 talking about that. So we need to understand that um, disease emerges and spreads because of our interactions. So an example of that is we can trace HIV. HIV came from Africa, but its origins are more mysterious than you would think. So an evolutionary biologist searches for the origin of the virus um, by looking at similar viruses in primates in Africa. And so what they found was kind of crazy. And I don't know all of the details of this. I'm just going to highlight what this researcher found. So they were looking at this, and they found that many primates are infected with retroviruses. HIV is a retrovirus, meaning that it's um, it's doesn't have DNA, it has RNA, and it injects its RNA, and then it has an enzyme called reverse transcriptase, and so it'll take RNA and make DNA once it's inside the cell. And so that's what a reverse or a retrovirus does. And so what they did is they looked at the genomes of these viruses to see how they were related to each other. And what they found is that in these areas, this green retrovirus, this purple one, this red one, and this blue one came from different areas, but when they looked at them closely, they were pretty close on the evolutionary tree, um, like really close. And so they're all related to each other. So um, the human AIDS virus, type 1 and type 2, are zoonotic infections that they have come back and forth through primates. So we have a monkey trade where We have bush people that are hunting monkeys and selling different um, different bush meat from them. So that is one of the hypotheses that that HIV came from people that were hunting monkeys, and that the virus was in the monkeys, and we could get it from them. So for years, transmission of retroviruses from apes was only known in laboratories and zoos, which when I talked about Ebola too, that was a laboratory situation. But then in 2004, they found African ape hunters being infected with the same class of viruses that cause AIDS. And so they were looking at hunting and butchering of primates playing a role in retroviral emergence. So getting a new zoonosis coming into humans that came from apes. Um, so here they also found another situation where hunting and butchering of wild non-human primates infected with simian immunodeficiency virus is thought to have sparked a HIV pandemic. So simian and HIV is are related. So, point number 4 is that we get evolution of viruses. And so, when you talk about booster shots, that's why we need to update what the vaccine is in order to match any variants that have been changed that would affect how they can infect a person. So, da, 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 da. So this is foodborne disease and antimicrobial resistance. So this is just talking about that we have emerging problems of um, because of having resistance, and that would be a change in the bacteria or the virus. So convergence and synthesis, they're just same thing, just talking about um, understanding infectious disease by looking at how diseases evolve. So here, this was an interesting quote. This is from Tufts University School of Medicine. Um, this is Dr. Stuart Levy. He was talking about antibiotics. He said medicine and public health would be much better off if medical students were taught as much about Darwin, in other words, evolution, as they are about Pasteur. So remember that Pasteur, I don't know if it's a remember, maybe I'm teaching it to you, that he discovered drug resistance. So Alexander Fleming warned that the overuse of penicillin would drive evolution of resistant bacteria. And right now, antibiotic resistant bacteria poses a serious threat to human health. We're going to talk about that in detail too. Um, so he discovered penicillin and warned about it, and no one listened to him. Here we have this is in the 1940s, 1960s. This is a drugstore in 1945. But during the 40s to the 60s, they just advertised penicillin as being a wonder drug, and it right away had some resistance problems. But nobody thought it was a big deal. Um, they, they just overprescribed it basically. And one of the things that um, that played a role in that is that the placebo effect, even if it wasn't working, it was making people better because the placebo effect is real, and it's medically documented that about 30% of the time, if you think something's working, it'll work. So doctors were not worried about antibiotic resistance and prescribing it even if they knew it wasn't going to help. So, penicillin can only work on bacteria, not on viruses. And even as a kid, I remember anytime I got sick, I got a pill. And that was just the way they dealt with everything. And now it's very different. So every time we come across new antibiotics, we get resistance. And that was not very common back in the 80s. You look here, this is methicillin, and it's showing that there was a very low rate of resistance, and the same with vancomycin. Vancomycin was the strongest antibiotic, and they would give you that if nothing else worked. And it's kind of like our last ditch effort. And in my teaching, being here, we had talked about whether vancomycin resistance was going to happen, and if it did, what we were going to do about it, because that's all we had. So if they become resistant to vancomycin, then they're resistant to absolutely everything, and that will lead to a health crisis. And we do have a health crisis in antibiotics. So I'm going to stop right there.